Okay, I think it's time, folks. I will get things started. First of all, a big welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's great to have you here. And, my name is Jason Vanderswan. I'm a home performance specialist with EnviroCentre, and I'm also a registered energy advisor. And so I routinely am out doing energy assessments on homes in Ottawa. And as part of my job, I get to deal with heat pumps a lot. And I have become a heat pump enthusiast. So I'm very happy to be here tonight with you. I suspect some of you here tonight you're here because you're considering getting a heat pump in your home. And that's a big decision, right? Obviously, there's a big capital cost involved, and you're going to have the equipment for 15 to 20 years. And so it's my hope that tonight I can answer any questions that you might have about heat pumps, and really give you everything that you need to make an informed purchase decision. Okay. And for those of you here tonight that already have a heat pump, well, congratulations. A special welcome to you. You're certainly welcome as we go through the presentation tonight. Please share your experiences with your system. There's nothing like some real life examples. It truly adds value. So again, as we go through the presentation, please feel free to share. It would be appreciated. So welcome to you all. I guess we're ready to go. So a couple of housekeeping items. As I mentioned, please take an opportunity to introduce yourself in chat. We would love to hear from you and any questions and comments that you have. Please, if you could, keep your microphones on mute. And just a heads up, this session is being recorded. And so the links and the webinar video are going to be shared after the presentation. Okay. So we'll start off tonight with a land acknowledgement. So EnviroCentre acknowledges that the land where we live, gather, and work is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And since time immemorial, the Algonquin peoples have lived here, and we're grateful to call it our home, and we endeavor to work respectfully with the land and its people. All right, so we'll be mindful of that as we get in tonight's session. So why are we here? Who's ready to talk heat pumps? So this is our agenda for tonight. We're going to be talking about how they operate. If you have a heat pump, what you can expect. We're going to talk about the benefits of heat pump. And as I mentioned before, for those of you that are actively shopping for a heat pump, we're going to be going through the different topics that you might consider, conversations that you might have with your HVAC provider. All right. So the session should take about 30 minutes, 35 minutes or so. And then after the presentation, we'll open it up to any questions that you might have. All right. Let's start off with some fun, right? HVAC trivia. I'm sure it's everybody's favorite game, right? So let's just get our blood flowing, get us in the mood to really talk about heat pumps. All right, first question. In what year did the first documented use of a heat pump take place? Was it 1922, 1856, 1938, or 1829? So just think about it a moment. Take your best guess. The answer is 1856. So fun fact, the first use of the heat pump was in 1856 in Austria. It actually had an industrial application in the salt mines. So kind of a far cry away from using it in a Canadian winter, but it's kind of cool to think that even 168 years ago, they had figured out the principles of heat pumps. That is, you could move heat from one place to another. So the tech has been around for a long time. All right, next question. In what year was a heat pump first used in Canada? Was it 1948, 72, 51, or 29? All right, the answer, 1948. So heat pumps have been in Canada for 75 years now. And I have no details on what that first heat pump might have been, but I suspect it was not the most efficient. Suffice to say, over the 75 years, technology advances, and until we are at today, where a cold climate heat pump is incredibly efficient. It can provide heat to the home, minus 25, minus 30 degrees, really well designed for a Canadian winter. So not new to Canada. They've been around for 75 years. Last question. How many Canadian homes use a heat pump to heat their home? Is it 130,000, 950,000, 625,000, or 800,000 homes? All right. Take your best guess. The answer is 800,000. So let's dig into that a little bit more. Now, this graph I'm providing just really to show you the overall trend of heat pump adoption in Canada over the past 20 years. So this represents all of the heat pumps in Canadian homes in the different provinces, and you can see the explosive growth. My son says, all the cool kids are doing it, and in this case, all the cool kids are getting heat pumps. It's definitely a trend, and why is that? Well, I mean, obviously, heat pumps they're able to provide heat to the home without carbon emissions. And so that makes them a big part of Canada's strategy to meet its net zero targets by 2050. And in fact, even in Ottawa, it's projected that in Ottawa, there will need to be 560,000 homes in Ottawa that have a heat pump by 2050 in order to achieve its net zero emission targets. So it's an important solution in the energy transition, and certainly an important part of any deep energy retrofit. Okay, so the trend is there, and we're only going to see more of heat pumps for sure. All right, let's get into heat pump operation. Let's talk about how they work and what you can expect by having one. Now, this is a pretty high level overview of how they work. I didn't want to get too technical. I promised my boss I wouldn't get too technical. So how do they work? Well, with a heat pump system, there are generally two components. You've got your outdoor unit sitting outside your house, and you've got your indoor unit typically in the basement. And connecting these two units are copper lines, all right, called the line set. And within these copper lines, there's a refrigerant that's moving back and forth between the two in a constant loop. And it's really that refrigerant that makes this possible. Now, there's a lot of physics at play. That refrigerant is going from gas to vapor and under different states of compression. But really, for our purposes, it's what it's doing. Its job is to move heat from one place to another. It's as simple as that. So how does this work in the summertime? All right, so in the summertime, obviously it's hot and humid outside of your home, and therefore it's going to be hot and humid inside of your home, which is something you're trying to avoid. And so you turn on your heat pump. So the refrigerant comes inside your house cold, and as the warm air, that hot, humid air from the house, as it passes over that refrigerant, it gets pulled in like a magnet. That heat gets absorbed into the refrigerant, and that heat then is dumped outside, leaving nice, cool air inside your house. And it's remarkably effective at doing this. I should add one more thing. As that heat from the house is being dumped into the refrigerant, it's also shedding any humidity. And so heat pumps, this is one of their strengths. Because of the way they work, kind of a slow and steady operation with air being passed over that coil all the time, they're remarkably effective in controlling humidity in the house and leaving you, in this case, with a nice, cool, comfortable environment. So that's how they work in the summertime. Pretty straightforward. Now, How do they work in the wintertime? Well, this is where things get a little bit weird because obviously in the wintertime, it's cold and frosty outside, which means it's going to be cold and frosty inside, which is what you don't want. So when I tell you that a heat pump takes heat from outside and dumps it inside, that might raise a few eyebrows. I mean, how can that be? It does seems like magic, really. But it's all relative. The refrigerant going outside is colder than the temperature in the outdoors. So I guess as long as that refrigerant is colder than the temperature outside, there's still a heat transfer that is taking place. And so that's what happens. The heat from outside is harvested, it's put into that refrigerant, it's brought inside the house, and again, warming your house. So yeah, it's remarkable technology, how that works. And it's able to do all of this without any burning of fossil fuels. All right. So two questions that I wanted to raise here is, can a heat pump provide heat at extreme temperatures? So the answer is yes, yes it can. But can it produce enough heat to heat your home? And the answer is probably not. Okay, now there are going to be exceptions. I mean, certainly some of the new homes that are extremely airtight, extremely energy efficient, it's quite possible with the right size heat pump that they could work all season long very effectively. But for most homes in Ottawa that are perhaps a few decades old, you're going to need a backup system at some point. And so let's just take a moment to talk about the different types of supplementary heating that's available. So generally speaking, it's either going to be an electric backup or a gas furnace backup, okay? So let's talk about electric first. This could be, it's resistance heat, electric baseboards, or electric strips in the ductwork itself. And the point I wanted to make here is that your electric backup and your heat pump can work at the same time, okay? Even when the heat pump is not able to provide heat, but can only provide a portion of the heat required for your home, it's still working. They work together hand in hand to provide the heat that you need to have a comfortable temperature in your home. A gas furnace works a little bit differently. With a gas furnace, the heat pump and the gas furnace cannot work together at the same time. So at some point, you need to switch from the heat pump to your gas backup. All right. And that is called a switchover temperature. And, as I mentioned, I'm a registered energy advisor, and I do a lot of post retrofit assessments in homes. And for those folks that have heat pumps installed, this whole concept of switchover temperatures is something that causes a lot of confusion. I get a lot of questions about this. What's it for? What does it do? How do I set it? What's the right temperature? And so I just want to spend a few minutes talking about these to provide a little bit of insight. All right. So again, at some point, your heat pump can't keep up with the heat that's required, and you need to switch over to your gas backup. So there's really two different approaches, if you will. You can either set it at your switchover at the thermal balance point or the economic balance point. So what's the difference? Well, for the thermal balance point, the idea is that you use your heat pump as long as possible. You use it until the very moment that it can no longer provide the amount of heat that is required. So the moment it needs help is when you switch to that backup, okay? The economic balance point is a little bit different. For the economic balance point, it's the cost of energy that dictates that. So the moment that it's cheaper to switch to your backup, that's when you switch, okay? So in general, I'll just summarize here. The thermal balance point, what you can expect generally is the thermal balance point is going to have lower carbon emissions if you take that approach, but slightly higher bills, okay? For the economic balance point, you're going to have lower bills, but a slightly higher carbon emission. So what's the correct answer? Well, it's a personal choice. It's entirely up to you. There is no real correct answer. I will say that in practice, what I've seen is that most HVAC contractors will set the thermostat to about -5. And that's kind of the best guess of what the economic balance point might be. But every home is different. There's no one universal temperature. It's going to be influenced by how airtight your home is, how much insulation you have. And so, my best advice is you'll get to know your system after a few months, after a season or two, and following the bills, you'll get a sense of what temperature is best in your situation. Okay. So that's switchover temperature. All right, there's another topic that causes some confusion when I go visit post retrofit. And that is, I get a lot of concerns that, there's frost on my outdoor unit, and it's making a little bit more noise than it should at that time. And so I wanted to discuss the defrost cycle, and this is just one of the normal routines. It's the way a heat pump works. It's the way it operates, that it's perfectly normal during the winter months that there is going to be some frost building up on the coil, and it has a built-in mechanism to deal with that. And so it will melt the frost, okay? And so there's two approaches. There's two approaches that your equipment will use in the defrost cycle. It can either be what they call demand defrost, in which the system is it detects that there's frost accumulation and it kicks into the defrost cycle, or it's a timer, really kind of every hour or every 90 minutes, it's going to kick into that defrost cycle. So this is something you should talk to your HVAC contractor about. Ideally, you want equipment that has that ability for the demand defrost, okay? Because any unnecessary defrost cycles will reduce the seasonal performance of the heat pump and end up costing you a little bit more money. So long story short, ideally, you want equipment that has that demand frost capability. All right. Let's move on to the benefits of heat pump. First up, and I hear this universally among new heat pump owners, is that it's a much more comfortable home. Going back, if you have equipment that's 15 years old or whatnot, your traditional gas furnace, the way that works is that when your thermostat calls for heat, you get this blast of hot air coming into your house. And when that main floor, that blast of hot air reaches your thermostat says, okay, it's warm enough now, and it shuts down. Regardless of whether enough heat has actually found its way into the upper floors or that room above the garage, the system is shut down. And so what happens in that scenario is you get cold spots, cold rooms. A heat pump kind of takes care of that. It has a different approach, and it solves that issue. A heat pump has a variable compressor, so it's designed to kind of work slow and steady, right? The heat rise coming from your ductwork is not going to be as hot as a traditional furnace, but your system is on for longer. So slow and steady wins the race, as they say. And so that heat has enough time to fill your house, slowly filling your house, reaching those upper rooms, reaching that room above the garage, and you end up with a much more uniform temperature throughout the house. All right, so that's consistent with the feedback that I get all the time from new heat pump owners. And I should say, and I kind of alluded to this before, that heat pumps are remarkably good at controlling humidity in the house because, again, this slow and steady approach. All right, so home comfort, one of the big advantages of owning a heat pump. The second benefit that I wanted to talk about was reduced energy use. And what I have here, this is actually information from a house that I modeled about a month ago or so. And it really illustrates how a heat pump system can reduce your energy use. So what are we looking at here? So this first column here, this is the before. And this particular home had a gas furnace with an AC, very typical backup, or very, very typical system, right? And so it used 33 gigajoules of electricity per year and 85 gigajoules of gas per year for a total of 118. So that's the before. After installing the heat pump, this is what it's going to look like. So 59 gigajoules of electricity, 37 gigajoules of gas for a total of 96 gigajoules of energy. So you can see there, definitely there has been a reduction in energy use. In fact, 19%. So what are our takeaways? How can we interpret this information? So a few observations is a minus 56% reduction in gas use. So you could say, as far as a point of use approach within the home, there's a carbon reduction of 56%. Unfortunately, we have to lower that a little bit because, as you can see, the system does use more electricity. Heat pumps run on electricity. And Ontario obviously has a very clean energy grid, but during peak times, we still do use some natural gas to provide electricity. Usually about 20%, I think, is the number. 20% of our electricity is from a gas-derived source. So we do have to lessen this amount a little bit. But even factoring for that, you can see the benefit here of a heat pump. You're using less energy overall, and your carbon footprint is significantly reduced. Okay. So this is just one example. As I mentioned, this was a house that I modeled a month or so ago. But there's a study put out by CanMet Energy that kind of supports this. According to this study by CanMet Energy, the average Ottawa home moving to a heat pump will reduce its energy by 22%. And so my number here, 19%, is pretty consistent with that. The report, incidentally, also goes on to say that for folks that get off of a gas furnace and go full electric, that they can anticipate a reduction in energy use of about 60%. Okay, so it opens up a discussion for the possibility of going full electric. All right. Okay. So I wanted to talk about the next benefit. I called it potential lower energy bills. Now, all of this information is taken from that CanMet Energy study that I mentioned, and this was published in 2022. Okay, and this study, it's a pretty interesting read if you get a chance. What it does is it looked at different energy scenarios across the country in all provinces and in major cities. All right, and it provided information on the major city centers, and Ottawa was one of them. And so let's take a look at what their findings are. And I should say that this information was based on a two-story home that was constructed after 1980. Okay, so that's kind of the benchmark that they used. So these numbers here obviously may not apply in your different circumstance. If you have an older home, the numbers might be different, but this is a good place to start. Okay, so for those folks that are currently heating their home with electric resistance, you've got the baseboard heating as an example. If you add a heat pump to that scenario, you can expect an annual savings of $2,250. So pretty compelling argument to go heat pump if you're heated with electric resistance. If you have an oil furnace and you switch to full electric with a heat pump, your estimated annual savings is $2,888, also very strong. The report did not mention propane, incidentally, but I would imagine propane would be looking pretty good as well. Propane's pretty expensive, right? So, what about folks converting from a gas furnace to full electric with a heat pump? Okay, it's pretty much break even. It's $120. So, and if in a situation you have an existing gas furnace, you want to stick with the gas furnace and you add a heat pump, they call that a hybrid system, which is probably the most popular option right now is to have a hybrid. So you can expect pretty much to break even in your energy costs. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time in this space because this, of course, is an average. There are going to be homes that save more, and there's going to be homes that it actually costs more on their bills to install a heat pump. And so, what are some of the things that you as a homeowner can do to make sure that you're on the lower side of the equation? Well, a heat pump should be part of an overall retrofit on your home. Things like air sealing, things like adding insulation to your attic or your basement, really any work that you do on the envelope of the home is going to help retain that heat. So that heat pump is going to have to work less, and that is going to have a dampening effect on your energy bills. Also, an influence is how you use it. We mentioned the switchover points before. So this study, incidentally, assumed that folks were using that economic switchover point. And so it's important you, again, find that right temperature for your house. So you're kind of optimizing the savings if that's a priority for you. The other interesting thing, and this is perhaps beyond the scope of this presentation, is the future cost of fuel, right? Because this study kind of looked back in previous years. Now, if what's going to happen to the price of gas in the future, what's going to happen to the price of electricity in the future? I mean, who knows? I wish I had a crystal ball, but kind of what we expect to happen is that there's upward pressure on the price of gas. While it's true that political winds change, it seems reasonable to conclude that if we're serious about getting off of gas, if we're serious about making that energy transition, there is going to be a price of carbon in some form or another, and that should put upward pressure on gas prices. On the electric side of things, there's lots of things happening right now to build capacity in the system and to ideally lower electricity rates. Things like the Ontario Energy Board put out a report in November where it talked about different projects, wind and solar, storage coming online. That's going to have a dampening effect on prices. I know the Ontario government is giving some thought to allowing some consolidation of the municipal utilities, perhaps opening the system up to some private investment. All this to say is there's things in motion to build capacity in the electrical grid and ideally lower rates. So you're going to have this equipment for 15 to 20 years. If prices behave as we kind of anticipate that they will, it's certainly a smart financial decision as well. Time will tell. Okay. All right, let's move on to shopping for a heat pump. So these are some topics that you might have, questions you might have for your HVAC provider. So let's move through this pretty quickly. I see it's 6:30 already, so I'm going to move through this a little bit quicker. So types of heat pumps, this is pretty straightforward stuff. Centrally ducted is the first one. If you have ductwork in your home, chances are you're going to need a centrally ducted heat pump. It's going to look very much like the system that you have right now. Mini split systems, these are pretty cool. So if you've got electric baseboards right now, you don't have ductwork, you need a mini split system. And it's the same approach. You can see in the picture here, there's the outside unit we talked about before. The refrigerant lines are connected to the indoor unit. So it's the same concept. Now, you may need two or three or even four different mini splits in your house. I have seen a few designs where it's a combination duct and mini split system. If you have an older home with an addition, that addition might not have ductwork in it. So in that case, you could have the best of both worlds. All right. I have to mention ground source heat pumps. Very cool technology. Not very practical within the city, so I won't go into it. But if you're in a more rural setting and ground source heat pumps are of interest, feel free to book a coaching session with me. I'd be happy to walk you through it and provide any assistance that I can. Okay, let's get into efficiency ratings. Now, I did promise my boss that I wouldn't get too technical, but I thought it would be good to spend just a couple of minutes in this space, because really, if you're shopping for a heat pump, you're going to get 3 or 4 quotes. And so you're inevitably going to be looking at, 2 or 3 models and, what's the difference between these models? Which one is the better model? And so you're going to, it helps to understand the efficiency ratings. So I want to move through these, just to give you a little bit of background. I'll move through them fairly quickly. Suffice to say that all of these efficiency ratings are all based on one thing. That's really how much heat is being provided for every unit of fuel being used. So they're all a variation of that. How much heat is provided for every unit of fuel. So we'll start off here with the AFUE, the annual fuel utilization efficiency. So here, this is for a furnace, a gas furnace. So on the left-hand side, you see fuel in, and on the right-hand side, you see heat out, right? So you put a cubic meter of gas into your furnace, combustion is taking place, it's burning that gas, it is providing heat, and in this case, it's 97% efficiency, so 97% of the heat is being provided to your home. 3% of that heat is lost out the flue, along with, unfortunately, a number of other byproducts of combustion. But all in all, 97% efficiency, pretty good. That's pretty much state-of-the-art technology in combustion. Now, how does this compare to a heat pump? So if you've read any articles or seen on social media or whatever, if you hear anybody talking about heat pumps, inevitably they're going to say they're so efficient, you can get 300, 400% efficiencies. And they're right. Absolutely. They are really remarkable technology. All right. So in this case, it's called the coefficient of performance. So you have 1 kilowatt of electricity going in, and there you go. 3 units of heat are being provided. So that's 300%. Okay, that's pretty efficient, and that's one of the strengths of heat pumps. Unfortunately, there's more to the story. It's not always going to be 3%. This COP measure, it does vary with temperature. Okay, it goes up when the temperature rises, and it goes down with lower temperatures. And so this is the most technical thing that I have tonight, I promise. And I just wanted to provide it for illustration for what I was just talking about. That here you see COP on the left and temperatures on the bottom. And if you go down this curve, I'm just trying to illustrate here that COP does drop. The efficiency of a unit does drop as temperatures drop, which means, again, as we talked about before, at some point, you're going to need to switch to that backup system. So somewhere along this curve, you're going to set those switchover points that we talked about. Somewhere is your economic switchover point and your thermal switchover point. Okay. All right. We'll just move on. This is the last slide on efficiency ratings. I wanted to make sure you're familiar with this terminology. So you have the heating seasonal performance factor and the seasonal energy efficiency ratio, the SEER, that's mostly on the cooling side. So the COP was a measure of efficiency at one particular temperature. And these are seasonal measures, so it's kind of over the entire season. Capacity maintenance is quite simply how efficient your system is at those extreme low temperatures. And it's important if you're looking at getting the HER, the home efficiency rebate from Enbridge, they have a minimum capacity maintenance requirement of 70%, and the incentive for the better homes is as 80%. So, all right, let's move on. Very quickly here, sound ratings is something also that you may wish to be aware of. And in general, heat pumps are much quieter than equipment had been in previous years. Your standard air conditioner, this is measured in decibels, by the way. So just to give you some context, 60 decibels would be a normal conversation. 70 decibels might be a vacuum cleaner getting a little bit louder, and 80 decibels might be an alarm clock. So typical AC would run between 55 to 72. Heat pumps, as you can see, are considerably quieter than that. They run at different speeds, as we talked about, and at the faster speeds is when they're going to be a little bit louder. But generally speaking, heat pumps are considered a pretty quiet technology. Sizing, obviously an important conversation for you to have with your HVAC contractor. And so, feel free to ask them, what is the method they're using to calculate the heating and cooling load in your home? There's a number of different ways that this can be accomplished. CanMet Energy has, I think, what should be the industry standard, taking all sorts of things into consideration to coming up with an accurate calculation of the heat load. That's just one. Calculating the heating and cooling load is one important factor. Then there's the realities sometimes of what's going on in the home. If you have some older ductwork, you might not be able to get as large of a heat pump as you want. I'm just saying there's definitely some constraints, and this is a conversation that you might want to have with your HVAC contractor. All right. In the interest of time, I'm just going to move on here. How much can you expect to pay? That's a pretty important question. So this is based on actual transactions that I have seen in the past 3 months or so. If you're looking at a hybrid system, you're looking at, and it depends on the size of the system, of course, but somewhere between 13 and 18. Full electric systems tend to run higher, right? 20 to 25,000 on average. Plus, there's a question of, do you need a service upgrade, which could add a little bit of cost to that transaction as well. Mini splits, generally speaking, 15 to 20,000. Okay, these are ballpark figures. Shop around, right? 3 or 4 quotes minimum. Make sure you're comfortable with the solution that you've got. Oh yeah, electrical considerations. This is something that you should have a conversation with your contractor. Do you need to upgrade that service? Because that can be a pretty hefty price tag. My spouse and I just had ours done for our future energy retrofit needs, and our cost came in pretty much right in the middle of that range. So I think that's fairly accurate. So do you need a panel upgrade if you get a heat pump? Generally speaking, not. If you had a gas furnace before with an AC and you're putting in a heat pump in place of that AC, you're more than likely going to be okay. Really, this comes into consideration if you go full electric, if you have to add an electric water heater, possibly an induction stove, leading to, you might also add an EV or whatnot. At some point, going full electric, this is definitely a question that you're going to have to give some consideration to. All right, we're almost through it. Rebates and loans. So as I mentioned before, there is a home efficiency rebate through Enbridge. I believe that's anywhere from $500 to $2,000 for a qualifying cold climate heat pump. And there is the federal government oil to heat pump affordability program, where you can get up to $10,000 for qualifying homeowners that are going to make that change from oil to a heat pump. The different loans available. You're probably aware of this already. There's the Canada Greener Homes Loan, which is an interest-free loan up to $40,000 for 10 years. Pretty sweet deal. There's also the Better Home Ottawa Loan Program, which is also a very solid option. And in practice, what we see is homeowners doing larger retrofits will take advantage of both loans, and there's no harm in doing that as well. Just a little bit more about the Better Homes Ottawa loan. That particular loan is a low interest loan, 20 years, up to $125,000 or 10% of the current value assessment of your home. And it too offers a heat pump incentive. Okay, so if you get a heat pump and you're taking advantage of the Better Homes Ottawa loan, you can expect $300 per ton for a cold climate heat pump or $200 for a mini split system. Okay, lots of good incentives. And just to summarize then, for those of you who are actively shopping, these are...
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. There's just a Zoom pop-up on the presentation. Do you just want to close that real quick?
Sure.
Yeah.
You want me to approve it?
No, it's fine. You can just hit the X button. Yeah.
All right.
Perfect. All right, back to you.
Yeah. So again, like I was saying, just a summary of questions to ask your contractor. Okay. So what type of heat pump is best for my home?
Sorry,
How will
Jason.
this size? Wow.
It's come back.
Mhm.
Maybe just hit approve.
Okay. I'll hit approve.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. How will the size of equipment be determined? That's an important question. In the case of a hybrid system, what are the settings of the automated controls to switch between the primary and backup? We kind of talked about that as well. Maintenance schedules, warranties, these are all good conversations to have with your contractor. So there you go. I hope this has been beneficial. I hope this has been useful information, like I said, to help you make an informed purchase of your heat pump system. And one final thing. We did go through all of that fairly quickly. If you want to have more information, or if you have a couple of quotes and you're looking for a second opinion, that's kind of my role with EnviroCentre. I do a lot of energy coaching. And so you're more than welcome to book an energy coaching session with me. I'm happy to help out in any way that I can. All right. Maybe Darren, you can put the booking link in.
Thanks, Jason. I've already shared the booking link earlier.
Oh, all right. Yeah. So there you go. Thank you so much for sitting through my presentation. I appreciate it. Let's open it up to some Q&A and see what we have.
All right, so we did have a few questions and comments that came in. The first one was from Peter. Peter is trying to figure out which would be better for carbon reduction and or cash flow. I suppose they are debating between an electric vehicle or a heat pump. Any thoughts or comments?
Oh, as far as which is a priority for lower carbon emissions?
Yeah.
Oh,
go with that. And
you know,
Peter, feel free to chime in the chat if you would want to expand further.
Well, you know, it's a great question, Peter. And first of all, congratulations for, you know, the decision to prioritize lowering carbon emissions. As far as which one is going to have a greater impact on carbon emissions, I honestly, I don't know offhand. So, but it's an interesting question. I'd like to do a little bit of homework on. So perhaps we can, if you book an energy coaching session, we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. And certainly, as part of the Q&A, as part of the resources we send out, we're going to make sure that these questions are answered. But yeah, no, I know they're both obviously have a big impact on reducing carbon emissions. As far as which one would have a greater impact, I don't know off the top of my head. So.
Thanks for that, Jason. We have two heat pump related questions from Z. They are trying to figure out how to properly size their heat pump for their home. So they've listened to a few YouTube videos around manual J calculations. to determine heat loss of their home, which was built in the 60s, and have shared that a couple of companies that they've reached out to for quotes apparently are using methodology of sizing a heat pump based on square footage. Which seems a bit inaccurate. Any thoughts on that? I know you were just in contact with a HVAC contractor the other day.
Yeah, it's a it's a tough one for sure. Manual J is a good method that's used primarily in the States, and we have our own one that kind of CanMet has come up with. Um, I think in practice, what I have seen is that there is a lot of rule of thumb that is used. So it's important to talk to um, different contractors, get multiple opinions. On the Ottawa Better Homes website, there's a list of contractors that have gone through kind of carbon or zero, yeah,
Net zero training.
net
Yeah,
zero training. Thank you,
there you
Darren.
go. No worries.
And so I have found working with them, there's a little bit more scrutiny on the proper sizing, and but yeah, it's definitely it's an important conversation to have with your HVAC contractor, and make sure that you're comfortable with the answer. You're going to get different approaches, different responses, and that's the beauty of getting multiple quotes.
Awesome. Those are most of the questions. Peter had a question around um, list of qualified contractors, and Z also had one around asking the right questions to a contractor. I believe that link I shared in the chat around choosing a contractor provides a bit of information there. As Jason also mentioned, if you'd like to chat more about your plans and maybe issues and obstacles that you're facing, an energy coaching session may help. Peter's asking, what's the harm in oversizing of a heat pump?
Yeah, so I guess the big risk with oversizing a system is that it's going to cycle on and off um, more often. And by cycling on and off, you end up with a poorer air quality. Your humidity is not going to be as comfortable, and you might still get those hot and cool spots. That uniform temperature is not going to happen, and it's also going to put extra wear and tear on your equipment. Now, it's interesting, oversizing equipment is still an issue, but I'm going to say perhaps less of an issue than it has been, a decade ago. And that's because a lot of heat pumps these days, as I mentioned, they have variable compressors, and so they can actually scale down to meet the heating load or cooling load that is needed. So yes, oversizing is still a concern, but there's a little bit more forgiveness in the size that you're able to put in your home. Hopefully that answers your question.
Sure, Z, I can ask that one. Let me scroll up in case I might have missed that. So I think there was a follow-up question around the sizing, around ductwork in the house. So I'm just going to read it out because it's a bit long. I have another question regarding whether the ductwork I have in my house can be used unmodified or not. I have heard again from some sources that a heat pump needs to move more air than is usually needing to be moved by gas forced air. For this reason, is it important to make sure the ducts can accommodate the required airflow to work well? How is this determined? Of the companies I have had come to my home, only one thought I may need to make a small modification to the ductwork. The other companies didn't seem to know anything about ductwork requirements.
Yeah, so I've been out with a few contractors as they go to a home and do an assessment, and pretty much that's one of the primary things that they do is take many measurements of the plenum and of the ductwork, because absolutely it's going to have an influence on the size of of heat pump that you can put in. As I mentioned, when you're calculating that heat load, your heat load might suggest you need a 3 ton as an example. But if you've got an older home with maybe smaller ductwork, it's just not practical. It's not going to work in your home. So the ductwork conversation, the ductwork issue is definitely important. It definitely plays an impact on the size of system that you can have. And again, it's just a conversation to have with your HVAC company when you're talking sizing. So.
Great, thanks, Jason. I don't see any other questions coming in at the moment, unless someone is typing.
Okay. Well, then let's wrap it up, Darren. So,
We got a comment from Lindsay here. So Lindsay has a hybrid system. Is the switch between systems only based on outside temperature, or is it possible that the system is smart enough to switch between systems if it would be more efficient to use one over the other if we change the temperature setting for inside on the thermostat from 17 to 21 degrees, for instance?
yeah, that's a good question. I know the switchover temperature is, yeah. Uh, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to do a little bit of research on that one and provide the answer to you when we send it out. All right.
All right, no worries, Lindsay. Thank you for that comment. Okay, I don't see anything else.
Okay. Well, listen, folks, thanks again for coming out tonight. I do hope that you found some value in the information. And yeah, if for those of you who would like some more information, feel free to book an energy coaching session. I'm happy to help out in any way that I can. So, Darren will be sending out the video and any answers to the questions we received tonight.
Yep, so a follow-up email will go out probably in a week's time, recording of the session, the presentation, and folks, I've also added a link for you to reach out to us directly at betterhomes@envirocentre.ca. So if you maybe walk away from your screens with a follow-up question or a question we didn't answer here today, feel free
Yeah.
to write to us and Jason can get back to you and
Yeah.
maybe even suggest booking an energy coaching session. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Have a good
Have a good
night.
evening.